This morning in exposition, we're picking up with our study in Isaac. And as we did under Abraham, I would like to look at his biblical reputation. What do you think of when you think of Isaac? Tell me.
First thing we know is the altar being sacrificed.
Okay, the sacrifice on the altar. And that's very appropriate because Isaac represents in the Old Testament who? In the New. Right. Isaac is a type of Christ, whereas his father Abraham is the type of God. Right. Yeah. And we really see that parallel clearly in the Scriptures, both in the New Testament accounts as well as the Old Testament records of their actual lives. Isaac is mentioned by name 80 times in the book of Genesis. He's mentioned 30 more times throughout the Old Testament. And he is mentioned by name 19 times in the New. And the single concept that is associated with Isaac's name, with Isaac, is that he was a godly person. And a patriarch in Israel. Almost always in the Old Testament references to Isaac, he's associated with his father as a patriarch of Israel and a recipient of the covenant. That's usually when you hear Isaac's name mentioned in the Old Testament or read it, it's in the phrase, as God said to the fathers, to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, your fathers, sort of. It's always in that sort of list. Let me give you a few references. I've taken just one reference out of each one of the books in the Old Testament that mention Isaac, that should illustrate that. The last chapter of Genesis, chapter 50, and the third last verse. You have Joseph's, that is Isaac's grandson's reference to him. And Joseph said to his brothers, I die, and God will surely visit you and bring you out of this land to the land which he swore to give to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. So Isaac is included as a patriarch. Exodus chapter 2, verse 24. And God heard their groaning, the children of Israel in Egypt, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. Leviticus 26:42. God says, Then will I remember my covenant with Jacob, and also my covenant with Isaac, and also my covenant with Abraham will I remember, and I will remember the land. Numbers 32:11. Surely none of the men that came up out of Egypt from 20 years old and upward shall see the land which I swore to give to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, because they have not wholly followed me. That's a recapitulation of the sin of Kadesh. Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 8. Moses begins his sermons on the plains of Moab, east of the Jordan, with these words, Behold, I have set the land before you. Go in and possess the land which the Lord swore to your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It starts with the promises.
Are those three the only three considered patriarchs, or also the Abraham's take it slow. It's all you think it's wrong, and it's reference to things you just do it.
Well, I think maybe sometimes Moses is considered a patriarch, and most likely Joseph as well, but these are the three main ones. Sometimes you have the phrase "the fathers," and of course that would be all-inclusive, Right.
They're all definitely at the line.
Yeah. Let's see. I've read Deuteronomy. How about Joshua 24:4? At the conclusion of his life, Joshua recapitulates Jewish history. He says, this is God speaking, this is God's message through Joshua, I gave to Isaac, Jacob, and Esau. And I gave unto Esau Mount Seir to possess it. Verse 3, I guess we should have read first. I took your father Abraham from the other side of the river and led him throughout the land of Canaan and multiplied his seed and gave him Isaac. And I gave unto Isaac Jacob and Esau. Right, so it's a historical reference to God's provisions for these men.
Why do they say flood and landslide?
Where?
They say the other side of the flood. Abraham was on the other side of the flood.
I suppose it's a reference to the largeness of the Euphrates River. Like it's a huge river. It's a couple miles across. Yeah, my Bible has the King James changed. Corrupted versions, yeah. All right. Let's see. 1 Kings 18:36. 1 Kings 18:36. This is Elijah speaking. It came to pass at the time of the offering of the evening sacrifice that Elijah the prophet came near and said, Lord God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known this day that you are the God of Israel, and that I am thy servant, and that I have done all these things at thy word. Right? So he refers to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel. It's 25 after 8. 2 Kings 13:23. 2 Kings 13:23. This is Elisha. And the Lord was gracious to them, to Israel, and had compassion on them, and had respect unto them because of his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He would not destroy them. So all the way through Jewish history, a couple of other references I won't read. 1 Chronicles 16:16. 2 Chronicles 30, verse 6. Psalm 105:9. Right. And Jeremiah 33:26. Those are all the books. Yes. Those are all the books in which Isaac is named. And he's almost always associated with the other patriarchs, Abraham and Jacob. Now, the second thing about Isaac's reputation is that he is once named, or once or twice named in the Old Testament, and once or twice named in the New Testament as in genealogical data. In 1 Chronicles chapter 1, and Matthew 1, and Luke 3, and Acts 7. There are genealogical references in which Isaac is mentioned. I'm not going to bother with that. And then the third point about references to Isaac in the Scriptures is that in the book of Amos, his name is used once to identify the geographical location of Israel. I'll read that. Amos 7:9. Just as, for example, Jacob and Esau, their names came to represent the territories inhabited by their descendants. So it was with Isaac. Amos 7:9. Say Jonah, Micah, name Amos, Obadiah, Jonah. Amos 7:9. God is warning the people, and it's the vision of the plumb line, and he says, I will not again pass by them anymore, and the high places of Isaac shall be desolate, and the sanctuaries of Israel shall be laid waste. And I will rise against the house of Jeroboam with the sword. The high places of Isaac. Isaac was long dead by the days of Amos.
Yeah, it looked at him personal reference to him, but it's got, you have to have any reference to.
Sure, it's just...
You're not known for high places,
no. He was always known as a godly man. And so this is just a geographical reference to Israel. In chapter 7, verse 16, he's also mentioned of Amos. Now therefore hear the word of the Lord. Thou sayest, prophesy not against Israel, and drop not thy word against the house of Isaac. Therefore thus saith the Lord, and Amos answers this false prophet, or this false priest Amaziah. Right, so he refers to the house of Isaac, which is a reference to the people. All right. In the New Testament, Isaac has four characteristics, or is represented four different ways. A couple different times he's indicated as a believer, already enjoying the blessings of heaven. Matthew chapter 8, verse 11. 8:11. When Jesus had healed a centurion's servant, he was speaking about the future and how that just like this Gentile had at that point in his experience come to know the Lord, so in the future there would be many Gentiles. And he had claimed the faith of this Roman soldier. I say unto you that many shall come from the east and west, and shall sit down with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. Yeah. Okay. So Isaac is presently one of those glorified saints. The same thing is referred to in Luke 13:28. Once again, in the New Testament, we see that Isaac is simply indicated as one of the godly patriarchs. One reference would be Matthew 22:32. In his discussion of the Sadducees, Jesus pointed out their fundamental flaw. Have you not read that which was spoken unto you by God? They were completely ignorant of the Scriptures, saying, quote, I am the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac and the God of Jacob. God is not God is not the God of the dead, but of the living. And when the multitude heard this, they were astonished at his doctrine. I was pondering those words the other day. What was the significance? How did they get God is the God of the living out of that? The only thing I can indicate is that Jesus was basically inferring that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were alive. That's the only reason he would refer to it, because he was talking to the Sadducees just about the subject of resurrection and how they didn't believe it. They had posed a theoretical question to try to trap him, and so he answered that God is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and that proves he's the God of the living. So he must have been arguing that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were alive. Well, here Isaac in the New Testament is used by the Lord Jesus as, or referred to as, just as he is regularly in the Old Testament indicated as one of the godly patriarchs. Perhaps with the added emphasis here that he's alive today.
Let's see
I think soul sleep is used of people who die in the present age, and it's kind of like limbo. That your personhood is in limbo, and that there's no such thing as heaven. I mean, the Jehovah's Witnesses believe in soul sleep, I believe. That's because they don't believe in heaven, so I mean, they got no problem. Yeah. Yeah, we're here to just lay around somewhere. I don't know where. Somewhere. Sometime. So Isaac in the New Testament is a believer. He's a living, godly patriarch. I suppose that more important than those two, that he is stressed as the son of promise many times. Let me give you the references for that. Romans 9, verses 7 and 10. Galatians 4:28. Right. Galatians 4:28. Hebrews 11:9 and 17 and 18. Now, in Romans chapter 9, familiar passage, in discussing the privilege of the Jews as descended physically from Abraham, God says, Paul says, not as though the word of God has taken no effect, for they are not all Israel who are of Israel. Neither because they are the seed of Abraham are they children, but, and he refers back to the Abrahamic covenant, in Isaac shall thy seed be called. That is, they who are the children of the flesh. These are not the children of God, but the children of the promise are counted as the seed. So,
the 7 through 10,
yeah, I didn't read them all, but verse 7 and 8 are the key verses.
Yeah.
I was reading in a publication I got from, I think it was Jews for Jesus the other day, and there was a testimony of a young Jewish man that had become saved. It was a real striking testimony, and how that another a Hebrew Christian, had shown him from the book of Genesis that Ishmael was descended from Abraham. And he had never recognized the difference between Ishmael and Isaac. That they were both descended from Abraham, but one was a godly person and one was a fleshly person. And never noticed, Jews assume that because they are physical descendants of Abraham, that gives them an automatic status with God. And that's clearly not what the scriptures teach. And Isaac is a good illustration of that. It was, and it was very hard for him to overcome that. But it was very illuminating as well for this person to actually go to the scriptures and show him an example of a person who was, it wasn't Jews for Jesus, it was Israel My Glory. It was just a recent testimony I read. It was the last one that I got. There's a story about a young guy that had gotten saved. Part of his testimony. So, Isaac is the son of promise. Galatians 4:28. In his allegory, using Sarah and Hagar as representatives of fleshly versus spiritual religion, if you will, Paul comes down to this point. Now we, brethren, as Isaac was, are the children of promise. And he's not alluding here to his Jewish brethren, but to the believers. See? But as then he that was born after the flesh persecuted him that was born after the Spirit, even so it is now. Yeah. And so there's this continuing conflict between mere fleshly religion and truly spiritual people. And so Isaac is stressed as the child of promise. And I won't bother to read the Hebrews 11 reference, but it refers to him similarly. So Isaac then in the New Testament is not only a believer, not only a resurrected and living godly patriarch in heaven, but he is the son of promise. Especially distinct in that respect, son of promise. Not just Jewish, but spiritually alive at the same time. There is one reference in Hebrews 11 that indicates that Isaac was a man of faith. He is used by the author to illustrate that. Hebrews 11:20, by faith Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau concerning things to come. 11:20. Yes. All right, so Isaac is not quite the dominant figure that Abraham was, but he does have a reputation as a godly person, especially chosen as the child of promise. And throughout the scriptures, the dominant thing is that he was one of the patriarchs, one of the specially chosen and blessed individuals that God made his promises to. Let's talk about chronology for a few minutes. You know what? I was praising the Lord last night. I found the two chronologies that I had done, that I was looking for earlier in exposition. I finally found them. Thought I lost them forever. It was a couple of days' work, and I was really glad to find them. Pardon? No, this life chronology of the patriarchs extended from Abraham through Esau, or through Joseph. From the birth of Abraham right through to the death of Joseph. This is what I wanted you to do. So I finally found it, and I'll be able to mark your papers without having to redo the thing. Yeah, okay. Let me just give you a few points here. You may want to jot them down. You might have already done this. I hope you've already done it. Let's just talk about Isaac here. Isaac was born when Abraham was 100, right? So Abraham was 100. Okay, I'm going to leave references to Abraham out of it except for that point. So, this is chapter 21, verse 5, he's born. And the next stated date is that Isaac was 40 when he was married. And I think it says that he was, you can deduce that he was 37 when his mother died. Right? So he was bereaved of his mother at 37. He married at 40. That reference is given to us in 25:20. You may be able to take a reference here in chapter 22, verse 5. You have to leave it unknown except for Jewish tradition. How old was he when he was offered? We don't know for sure. Okay. But Jewish tradition says, Josephus says that he was 25. Jewish tradition says that he was 25 when Abraham offered him on the Mount Moriah. That's rather interesting. The picture that we have is that he's always an 8 or 9 year old boy or something, not really quite comprehending what is happening. The record calls him a lad. Well, lad is a word that can be used of young men as well. In the Hebrew, it's very... Well, it depends on, I suppose, the age of the person that uses the term, have somebody that's 17 years old referring to other lads. Well, he's probably talking to people that are less than 17. All right. Now, Isaac marries Rebekah at 40 years of age, and the next dated reference is that he's 75 when his father dies, because Abraham dies at 175. And that's chapter 25, verse 8, indicates that Abraham died when he was 75. When his son Isaac was 75. Isaac was therefore 100 when his son Esau married at 40. And the reference to that would be 26:34. So Esau married. My chart here is going to rub off the board because I didn't lay it out properly. Yeah.
This is additional information, but somebody else better charge than what I put in.
Oh, they can't use it.
They can't use it. None of the rest of this business will be used.
Have you guys handed this in yet? Oh, yeah. Okay, I'll stop right there.
What did you say? I was saying because the man is making me feel down, like. No, like the deaths I've done on a scale, but if there's any point that the birth and death to be cross-referenced without actually may not be noted, like I can just pick up my sheet and say, well, Abraham was
Well, this is what makes it interesting to tell the story. Like, once you're given your basic information, you cross-reference how old so-and-so would have been, even though the record doesn't tell us. We can put two and two together. And then if you're telling a story, you know, you can state that as one of the facts of the story, that even though the scriptures don't tell you directly, indirectly they tell you the fact of the matter.
Yeah, I did it on a scale so that at any point of that I can refer to somebody else's statement. I would not necessarily have that how old he was when he was born and stuff like that, you know, but I can, or not born, but married. A lot of those things are cross-references going on before.
For instance, I can tell you how old Isaac was when Joseph was born, his grandson. Now, it takes about 6 references to come up with that. It actually takes about 6 references, cross-referencing, to find out how old somebody else was and how old they were when someone else was. And when you put that together, I can tell you how old Isaac was when his grandson was born.
If you take a look at mine, you'll be able to see that all you got to do is draw a line straight down and calculate there, because it's scale.
So I'll just be making little notations. You should have put.
Don't mark it up. That is a good one.
Okay. Anyway, do you know how old Isaac was when he died? It actually tells us that. Chapter 35:28 gives you that. Right?
No, I don't have it on my.
Read Genesis 35:28.
But I have it on my sheet.
Jacob came to Isaac his father, this is years after he had strayed, came back to Hebron, that is to Mamre, under the city of Arbor, which is Hebron, where Abraham and Isaac sojourned, and the days of Isaac were 180 years. So, he was 180. Score is 20. Okay. So, it's kind of interesting, Isaac outlived his own dad in terms of overall age. Abraham was 175 and Isaac lived to 180, even though he appears to be a less dominant figure in the record. He lived longer than his father. In fact, he lived longer than any of the patriarchs. He lived longer than his sons, and he lived longer than Jacob. He lived longer than Joseph. So,
You've done any chronological split from creation history?
yes, I brought it down to the end of Abraham's life, and I just now that I hadn't done this relative chart, putting the patriarchs together, but now that I have that data, I could add it, and it just becomes like I would have to get a larger chart with broader time elements to be able to show it more specifically. But
Whereas you're the people that are still alive.
when so and so else is still alive.
No, I got it all figured down now, but
For instance,
not in charts on it.
it's very clear that Abraham probably knew Noah, according to this. Abraham lived a short life compared to the ancient patriarchs, but Noah lived so long. Noah lived till he was didn't he live till he was 950? Yeah, it says he lived.
3, 7, 8, 9, something.
He lived for 350 years after the flood. Yeah. So that brings him way down. Like he knew all of these guys. Abraham could have known Noah personally. It's phenomenal how it fits together. I didn't think that you could go back. So maybe someday you may hear some new heresy about the chronology.
I know when I mentioned that to you before, you talked about it with
yeah, I thought that that we could work from creation up to about the time of Abraham, but it was kind of not really clear. And then I thought we could work back in Jewish history from archaeology, but there was an unknown, like you're talking about apples and oranges, because there's nothing to actually relate them. But apparently, according to this, you can go right from creation right to the days of Abraham on into the days of the younger patriarchs, and then therefore you're right into Jewish history, the days of Moses. So I'm sure someone else has done this. It's just Usher. Yeah. No, I think we'll quit with this today, and tomorrow next class we'll pick up with the ancestry and the typology of Isaac, because that's really what the significance of his life is. Okay?